In England, intimidation and bullying is part and parcel of working in schools. In what universe is turning schools into frivolous theatre for Ofsted helping make sure the education standards are high for all children? So, Ofsted reports are unreliable, inconsistent, subjective, and fabricated. Got it. The entire organisation's purpose is irrelevant and does about as much to inform school choice as using your astrology sign would. Ofsted is after you, and they will paint you as a concern until you live in fear of Ofsted inspectors in your own home. And the result of this relentless fear campaign is dire. What happened to Ruth Perry, the primary school head teacher who took her own life after Ofsted inspection, and what has changed since her death? Ruth Perry killed herself after hearing Ofsted were downgrading her school. In a Sky News article regarding the fallout following Ruth Perry's Ofsted-induced suicide, we learned from Ruth's sister, Dr. Julia Waters, that Miss Perry had been a former pupil of Caversham Primary, and Miss Waters said the inspection destroyed 32 years of her vocation and preyed on her mind until she couldn't take it anymore. She added, Ruth took her own life on January 8. All during that process, every time I spoke to her, she would talk about the countdown. I remember the very first day I saw her, rather than just speaking to her on the phone. A couple of days after the end of the Ofsted inspection, she came. She was an absolute shadow of her former self. That poor lady. Now, here is where Ofsted are exposed as the bullies they are. There was a brief outrage following Ruth Perry's suicide, and at least 2 unions have called on Ofsted to pause inspections, the National Education Union and the National Association of Head Teachers. Dr. Mary Bousted, Joint General Secretary of the NEU, said, Ofsted should pause all its inspections and reflect upon the unmanageable and counterproductive stress they cause for school leaders and the impact on leaders. Now, how do you think power-obsessed, useless Ofsted responded to this scrutiny? Will they back down in reverence to the innocent life lost, to the stress they impose? Or will they issue even more inspections to hammer down their influence and then suggest that they are the real victims behind this tragedy? You already know. Following Ruth Perry's suicide, Dr. Mary Bousted stated that they are phoning leaders this week and initiating inspections speak to the arrogance of Ofsted and their absolute lack of empathy. This is an agency that is completely out of touch, which is making claims and judgments which are unreliable. This can't go on. Can you believe that? Their response to their inspections causing a head teacher to commit suicide is to phone head teachers all week, organising more inspections. You might be surprised by this, but I'm not. Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former Ofsted Chief Inspector, stated before officially taking up the Chief Inspector position that, in future, a satisfactory rating by inspectors should be viewed as unsatisfactory, and that Ofsted should look at whether heads were being too generous to failing teachers when allocating performance-related pay. A good head would never be loved by his or her staff, he added. If anyone says to you that staff's morale is at an all-time low, you know you're doing something right. Translation: if your staff are depressed and traumatized by Ofsted, the head of Ofsted takes that as a positive accomplishment.
Find your lack of morale pleasing.
Oh, by the way, Ofsted's motto is raising standards, improving lives.
Ironic.
Anyone that has ever had to deal with Ofsted is not surprised that their inspections can literally claim a life. But Ofsted's audacity gets even worse. Then Chief Inspector Amanda Spielman went on to claim that basically Ofsted is a victim in all this too. Spielman claims Head's death used to try and discredit Ofsted. There was a very sad case in the spring that has been used as a pivot to try and discredit what we do, later clarifying that the comment was related to Perry. Never mind that a poor Ofsted report could lead to head teachers being disappeared. No, Ofsted is the victim. Completely void of all humanity, this worthless organisation even used this opportunity to try and justify a higher budget. In her final report published on the 23rd of November 2023, Amanda Spielman writes, Ofsted's role is also poorly understood. Many people do not recognise that as a matter of government policy, Ofsted's schoolwork and funding has long been limited to the diagnostic function of inspection. Finally, I have been Chief Inspector through 7 years of intense pressure on public finances, during which our already reduced budget had to absorb the entire impact of inflation. Relative to school budgets, the current government allocation to school inspection is about a quarter of what it was 20 years ago. To illustrate this, the entirety of our work on state secondary schools including all training and overheads, now has to be done with the budget of one moderately large secondary school. This means that school inspections are necessarily shorter and more intense, reports are necessarily briefer, and many strands of our work that help build school sector goodwill and reinforce our values to the sector, governments and others are having to be progressively curtailed. Despite all this, Ofsted continues to perform its role fairly, professionally, thoroughly and constructively. We aim to raise standards and improve lives, and I am confident we do that. I firmly believe that our independent scrutiny is of huge benefit to the education and care sectors and to the children and learners we all serve. Huge benefit, huh? Now, there was a recent inquest into Ruth Perry's suicide, and as a result, we learned more about what happened. Alan Derry, the lead Ofsted inspector during the inspection, said that Miss Perry became very upset and very tearful. He said, "She looked like she was in pain. At that point, she was saying things like she felt she couldn't show her face again." He had a meeting with her later that morning where they discussed problems with record keeping around vulnerable pupils. Mr. Derry said he discussed record keeping and pupil behaviour concerns with the chair of governors at the school on the second day of the inspection. "My mistake was to give a stronger impression to the chair of governors than actually the evidence had been showing and had shown," he said. So the inspector basically gave the wrong information and was therefore unreliable, and Ruth paid the price with her life. Don't forget, Ofsted like to predetermine what grade a school will get before they even start their inspection. They don't look for evidence, they try and justify their already made decisions. And the rating you get is subjective based on which inspector you happen to get on that day.
It's been revealed that Caversham Primary had a pilot visit from Ofsted for that new inspection framework in 2019, which included Amanda Spielman coming, and the head teacher Ruth said that the feedback was glowing. But yet a different inspector goes in, completely different outcome.
This is infuriating when you hear that the then head of Ofsted, Amanda Spielman, say this about the incident.
Do you think that the inspection came to the right conclusion?
I do. I think the findings were secure, and I think the inspection team worked with the professionalism and sensitivity that I would expect from our inspectors.
Have you any concerns at all about what happened during that inspection when her school went from outstanding to inadequate?
From what I've seen, I don't have any reason to doubt the inspection.
On a side note, did you know that last year Ofsted had to remove an inadequate rating from a school when it was determined that their findings were not reliable? Ofsted removed school inadequate rating after internal review. Ofsted has removed the school's inadequate inspection report from its website after admitting its findings were not reliable in a highly rare move. Queen Emma Primary School in Cambridge was inspected in October and given the lowest rating over its leadership and management and safeguarding. In an impact statement as part of the school's complaint to Ofsted, Jarman said the inspection experience had shattered every piece of self-belief I have. Last month, she told Schools Week that the school was seeking a judicial review with the expectation that Ofsted will most likely say to us, "There's nothing wrong with this inspection." Ofsted are way too powerful, and they feel untouchable. Their inspectors are bullies, and they get a kick out of intimidating and traumatizing schools.
The inquest into Ruth's death has shown the brutal inhumanity of the system of Ofsted inspections. Ofsted likes to judge people with single-word labels. We could judge the current Ofsted system with our own labels: callous, perverse, inhumane.
For some perspective into just how prevalent Ofsted abuse is, school complaints about bullying Ofsted inspectors soared to ridiculous levels in England. In 2022 to 2023, a total of 747 schools made formal complaints about Ofsted inspection, up from 454 the previous year, Ofsted's annual report says. But education consultants told The Observer that this number may rise further because they are receiving an unprecedented number of approaches from distressed heads unhappy with the behaviour of an inspector. They say these complaints are falling on deaf ears, with Ofsted failing to investigate poor conduct fully. The Observer has seen standard response letters to a number of schools which say that Ofsted will accept no additional evidence or witness statements or enter into any discussions with the school about an inspector's conduct. They add that concerns will be passed on to the inspector's regional manager and the outcome cannot be discussed with the school. Julie Price Grimshaw, a former inspector who now advises schools, said, "I had 3 heads contact me on just one day this week with serious inspector conduct issues. One was in tears. It's getting ridiculous. Ofsted will reduce your life's work to a single word, inadequate, oblivious to their own incompetence and harm.
Toxic and fear are definitely two words that I would associate with Ofsted inspections.
And the toll they take is being likened to a mental health crisis for teachers.
It used to make me feel like physically sick. I was absolutely petrified.
Jane left the profession partly because of it. She describes a culture of fear.
I had a really awful inspection. After that, I had a panic attack every time I needed even an informal observation in my teaching. And I couldn't do it anymore.
A rising number are speaking out after head teacher Ruth Perry took her own life following an inspection.
And head teachers committing suicide as a result of Ofsted inspections is nothing new. Following the shock of Ruth Perry's suicide, an article was released about another head teacher called Carol Woodward, who also committed suicide following an Ofsted inspection. Brutal Ofsted verdict drove my head teacher mum to suicide 8 years ago, woman, 25, reveals amid calls to axe the school watchdog. We read that, like Ruth, Carol Woodward was a dedicated head teacher of many years standing, who took her own life after learning that inspectors were to downgrade her Plymouth primary school to inadequate. This was a head teacher who in 2006 was named a Regional Primary Head Teacher of the Year and was also shortlisted for the National Award. And we're not done yet. Back in 2012, Helen Mann, the head teacher of the Sycampton School in Stoutport-on-Severn, also committed suicide following an Ofsted inspection. According to an article by the BBC titled Helen Mann Inquest Head Teacher Suicide Verdict, we read that a head teacher found hanged at her school in Worcestershire killed herself, a coroner has ruled. The inquest heard that the married mother of two had been concerned the school would lose its outstanding Ofsted rating after taking over, and was later off for 4 weeks with work-related stress. The coroner added that Miss Mann felt under pressure in her new role as head teacher of the Sycampton Primary School and feared failure. When this got too much, she took her own life. And even His Majesty's Inspectorate of Education, or HMIE, the Scottish equivalent of Ofsted, we learn that Sheriff finds head teacher Irene Hogg's suicide linked to school inspection. The suicide of head teacher Irene Hogg was inexorably linked to a school inspection report, a fatal accident inquiry found today. Does this sound like a force of good? Thanks to the Ruth Perry inquest, we learned that at least 10 other head teachers have been left suicidal in the wake of Ofsted inspections, a former inspector has revealed, as a coroner found a damning inspection had contributed to Ruth Perry's death. That means Ofsted has the same death toll as Dennis Rader, the infamous BTK killer.
He stalked the streets of Wichita, Kansas, claiming the lives of 10 victims. Known as BTK to the public, Dennis Rader would only be caught when he re-emerged 13 years after his last murder.
And that's just head teachers. According to research by the University of Leeds, stress caused by Ofsted inspections had been cited by coroners as a factor in the deaths of at least 10 teachers since 1998. Now, the aftermath of Ruth Perry's death launched a movement of confidence for people to stand up to Ofsted, to speak up about how ridiculously ineffective, destructive, and unnecessarily powerful they are. Photos of Ruth Perry are being shown as a symbol of resistance against Ofsted, and some head teachers are denying Ofsted access to their school. Some schools have even removed Ofsted references from their websites in solidarity after Ruth's death. It seems the tragedy of Ruth's suicide has brought about a wind of change.
The family say Ofsted changes don't go far enough. They say urgent lessons must be learnt from Mrs. Perry's death.
When 3 Ofsted inspectors pronounced, on frankly flimsy grounds, that Ruth's leadership and therefore her school were inadequate. No doubt you're doing your best, but you're working within a flawed, inhumane system. So follow the examples of Martin Hanbury, Andrew Morrish and others. Hand in your badges.
Ruth Perry's death in January prompted a national debate about the fairness of Ofsted inspections and demands for a comprehensive review.
Now, this was all under the former Chief Ofsted Inspector, Amanda Spielman. And Ofsted has a new Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver. And he briefly paused inspections in 2024 as a direct result of Ruth Perry's suicide. Inspections won't start next week as new Ofsted boss launches inquiry. The watchdog has faced fierce criticism after Perry's suicide. A coroner ruled that Ofsted inspections contributed to her death. adding there is a risk of future deaths if there is only lip service paid to learning from tragedies like this. Oliver added, I think Ofsted need to do a thorough review. It's already doing a review of its education inspection framework. I think we need to look at a review, quite rightly as the coroner requested, to our response to Ruth's tragic death. Now, some of you might be hopeful that Sir Martin Oliver is going to bring about meaningful change and make Ofsted more constructive and healthy for the school community. If so, you are incredibly naive. Ofsted reform is a dangerous concept, and for obvious reasons. Remember that thorough review Sir Martin Oliver said needed to happen? The one requested by the coroners? Just a moment ago? Well, this independent review was announced in April 2024 and will examine Ofsted's communication, stakeholder engagement, and how it supports staff. It'll be led by Dame Christine Gilbert, Ofsted's former chief inspector between 2006 and 2011.
I, the former Ofsted boss, have completed a thorough investigation of Ofsted and found that Ofsted is not guilty of any wrongdoing or negligence.
Besides that, this is literally Ofsted. They have schools all over England making surface-level changes to meet vacuous standards that they fling onto schools. You think Ofsted is going to go beyond surface-level changes after an inquest report? Of course not. Ofsted is going to get tiny pieces of its own medicine, and yes, hooray. But all they will do is introduce useless tasks for their employees to complete, so if they ever do get investigated, they can show a bunch of meaningless paperwork that looks pretty. Essentially, all Ofsted needs to do is prove they have introduced a series of steps to tackle the problems identified in the Ruth Perry inquest, and just keep doing what they're doing anyway. Case in point, leaders at Ofsted's first rapid revisit school resign over traumatic inspections. The head teacher and deputies at the first school revisited under the Ofsted rapid re-inspection system, introduced after Ruth Perry's death, have resigned saying the process was still too traumatic. So the new Ofsted is the old Ofsted, except on paper there are a few more boxes they have ticked for the inquest inspection. Sound familiar? Essentially, schools in England are engaged in a simple trade offer.
Hello there, baby reindeer. We understand you're interested in running a school in England. Perfect. Here is our typical trade offer all schools in the United Kingdom are offered. Essentially, you allow us to hold your school hostage, making your schools jump through our endless hoops, despite our inspection grades being predetermined, fabricated and flawed. We frankly couldn't care less how teachers view us, or what head teachers go through under our crusade to drive teachers out the profession. Frankly, we like to watch the entire education system in England cower in fear at our mention. Ha ha ha, we especially like it when they cry. In return, we receive a humble £134.1 million departmental expenditure limits budget, and complete power and influence over schools, and the power to terminate a school's funding, indirectly of course. And that's it. You can accept it, and maybe if you kiss enough of our ass, we'll give you a good rating. Or you can reject us, in which case you'll lose your funding, careers and reputation and so on. So what will it be, baby reindeer? Oh, you seem unsure. Maybe this will help motivate you.
You can either accept this trade offer and kiss enough Ofsted arse to impress them, that's assuming they haven't already predetermined your school's rating, or you can reject this trade offer and lose your livelihood, being fired like a football manager and having your reputation tarnished. This is why schools in England are held hostage by Ofsted. Now, so far we've established that schools are terrified of Ofsted and will do anything and everything to win their approval. They will make their staff and students jump through unnecessary hoops to gain a single word from the dumbest organisation imaginable. And if they don't, schools risk losing funding, having their reputation destroyed, and experience significant mental trauma to the point of suicide. But this raises an important question.